Hey, it's me again! And to the delight of some and the chagrin of others, I'm back! Let's start with the fish tank update. Because, a lot of people who watch me also have fish tanks. And some people get irrationally upset when I talk about fish tanks. But here's my fish tank. The corridoras are still alive. And my betta fish anthracite is still alive. And the last two takes of this video, he was out, but he might be asleep again. I'm not sure. Sometimes he sleeps in his little log there. It's great. Other times he's like in the cave back behind here, and it's hard to find him. Especially with all these plants. As you can see, there's a lot more carpeted plants in the tank. You can see this parrot feather's mostly stalks now. I've trimmed off some of those pieces and replanted them. This thing here, which was like a little scraggly leaf that I got when I first ordered it from Father Fish, has taken off and now it's blooming. Not only is it grown up, but now it's in bloom. There's these little purple snapdragon-y looking flowers on it. It's really awesome. But here's the fish tank update. Everything looks good. Some hair algae, but that's minor. If you have enough plants in your tank, that's the best way to drown out, in my opinion, algae. Oh, look, there's anthracite. You can see his fins there. There he is, swimming back behind that rock. I will say this, that the past couple of weeks, MMTLP, which is now Next Bridge, has had some excitement. The journalist, Johnny Tobacco, has sauntered into town. It's interesting that he's now taken interest in it because, in my opinion, he has a bit of experience that can really lend a lot of insight into this. As he used to have a share locate business. And now he has some more involvement in other things. And I think it can really lend some helpful insight. And because share lending's back up on topic with the trade station sending out the letters, they don't have enough certificates to match all the shares. I thought I'd go over share lending a bit. And yes, okay, there is the share lending, but the big word that nobody ever wants to hear still remains, and according to FINRA, it's still out there. You have an obligation. You know what I'm talking about. Liability. The worst word a lot of people can hear is liability. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about liabilities. And I thought it did an okay job with the mealworm analogy last year. So I'm going to bring it back again to talk about share lending, how it works, and how it doesn't absolve liabilities. That's part one. And then part two, we're going to get into the collateral fiasco, which makes things even more spicier and interesting and does not absolve liability. Here I am again. That's me, the bird lady. And I have 5 mealworms because I'm a bird. And all the stocks reside at Seed & Co. Seed & Co. Bird. Haha. So I have 5 mealworms. I love my mealworms. They're the best. And in a conventional supply and demand setting, somebody's like, hey, I want to buy your mealworms. Okay, we negotiate a price. If 30 people come up to me and want to buy mealworms, well, then I'm in a bit more favorable condition because the demand is more than the supply, so I can raise the price. That's how supply and demand works with a finite resource, like oil. All right, supply and demand. Talk about oil quite a bit. But here I am, a bird lady with 5 mealworms. But I don't have the mealworms in my physical hand. I have a representation of those mealworms which reside at a brokerage. Be it JP Morgan, E-Trade, whatever. So I have 5 mealworms and they're at a brokerage, right? That's a brokerage, a seed. The broker's like, hey, bird lady, there's been some demand for these mealworms. You want to lend them out? And I say, well, what's in it for me? Why do I want to lend these things out? Bird lady will make it worth your while. We'll pay you money to lend out your mealworms. You still get full economic rights. You could sell these mealworms at any time you'd like. and get market price and make money on it now. And some people go, yeah, that's great for me. Okay. So your brokerage says, yeah, I'm going to lend out your mealworms. And here comes a borrower. Here comes people saying, yeah, we have a demand for these mealworms. So the brokerage lends out your mealworms to, let's say, 3 people. This guy gets 2 mealworms. This person gets 1 mealworm. And this person gets 2 mealworms. My 5 mealworms have been lent out. 100%. This brokerage now has 0 mealworms to lend out. They lent out all their mealworms. So if somebody else needs to borrow mealworms, that's where locates come in. Is, well, who has mealworms to borrow? They're not at this brokerage anymore. JP Morgan Seed. They're somewhere else. They're at, eNest or something. So eNest is like, yeah, we got 2 to lend out. And Weevil, it's an insect, is like, yeah, we got 2 to lend out. And this guy, he's like, no, I'm with TD, no more. I don't want to lend out my mealworm. No. So 5 lent him out, and now there's 4 lent out. At this point, over 100% of my mealworm's been lent out. Lent out 100% the first time. And now the next time it's lent out 80%. 4 out of 5, 80%. So it's 180% lending that my mealworms have been lent out. Normally at this point, there might be a recall if, mealworms become exceptionally hard to find. If the price goes up, all of a sudden there's margin calls and those obligations to get those mealworms back. Maybe I want to sell my mealworms. I'm like, yeah, I still got full economic rights. You said I could sell at any time. I'm going to sell some of these mealworms in the market. I want my money now. And usually it gets recalled up the chain. Okay. But what happens if trading stops and all those obligations on the mealworms remain? Well, according to FINRA, they carried in an Bridge. That's fine. Brokers, had their own time to recall the mealworms, and they had their own standard operating procedure to get the mealworms. It was up to them. But according to FINRA, any outstanding mealworms that were lent out are now that obligation, that liability has been carried on into Bridge. So I'm adding this as a bit of an addendum now that I'm editing, because I know this is going to be asked. My question is, with TradeStation, how many people have lent shares and now they're going to decide, oh yeah, I'm going to register? Because remember, you can call back your shares at any time. If you've lent out mealworms, for example, if I had a share lending account and I lent some of the shares, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to register those shares. And then the broker registers those shares. That means somebody who didn't lend out those shares are not going to be able to register. Does that make sense? That's what I want to know about TradeStation. Because I had an account with the Weevil, let's say I had an account there, and I lent out my shares, and then I registered my shares. They said, yep, your shares are registered, they're AST, here's your account at AST. Okay, so I have shares registered now, AST in book entry form. Is there anybody who didn't lend out shares, and if the boat's full, like at TradeStation, now they can't get their shares registered? Again, that's a big liability on the broker. And I'm going to go more into this in part 2, what I've been trying to dig up. As Johnny Tobacco said, any lent share is a shorted share. He's correct on that. Because when shares are lent out, there's the price, the collateral price, right? You're not buying it, you're lending it out. So there's a collateral price that you pay, right? Which is usually determined the previous day. Okay, so you pay that price as collateral. You front that money up. Plus, there's an interest fee, right? If I have 5 mealworms and it's $10 per worm, the price, plus an interest fee, a $1 interest fee. Let's see, each worm has a $1 interest fee, so it's $55. So if the current price is $50 and you lent it out, to make money on this, they need to be recalled back at $44. Then I make at least $1. I've made $1. And that's how it works when your shares are lent out, right? Otherwise, nobody's going to lend this out because they're going to pay all this money and interest to lend out your shares. What are they going to get out of it, right? So it's that difference in discrepancy price where they pocket the difference is what makes it profitable for them to lend your shares out. And that's why it's shorted, because that's a discrepancy in price. In order for them to make money, they're betting that the price goes down to lend out the shares. They pocket the difference. Again, all lent shares, that means that they pretty much are inevitable shorted shares. Now, who buys those shorted shares? Who buys these mealworms down here? It could be a long position, and this person could be a short position. The chain of lending out the mealworms, as long as somebody's willing to lend out the mealworms, it usually doesn't go to infinity. Sometimes you will see over 100% on the books. That's what's currently being lent out, is on 100%. But it can go on as long as somebody wants to lend it out. Now, if everybody doesn't lend out, then you can't lend out the share anymore. And like I said, under normal conditions, if this is trading, they can recall the shares back, they can close, but this isn't trading, right? MMTLP, next bridge, not trading. All that liability's frozen. You still have full economic rights to this. You have full economic, and you're allowed to sell at any time. In my next video, I'm going to go over some of the equations used to determine what prices you get, why, in part, prices were set to zero. Zero, you might have noticed if you had a share lending account, you haven't gotten any interest since February. Why is that? If your share is still on loan. And what kind of liability this might have. Again, these shares on loan, the not trading, it doesn't absolve the liability. You're watching my own personal blog journey. You're just hearing one bird's thoughts. And I thought maybe let's try and keep this video short and concise. And then next time we'll talk about equations, why you haven't gotten any interest, what happens if a price precedent is set, what kind of liability is pushed on the brokerage, all that stuff. I will see you soon. Goodbye.